James Harold Wilson, Baron Wilson of Rievaulx, KG, OBE, PCFRS, FSS, was a British Labour Party politician who served as the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 1964 to 1970 and 1974 to 1976, first entering Parliament in 1945. Wilson was immediately appointed the Parliamentary Secretary to the Ministry of Works and rose quickly through the ministerial ranks, becoming the Secretary for Overseas Trade in 1947 and being appointed to the Cabinet just months later as the President of the Board of Trade.Later, in the Labour Shadow Cabinet. He served first as Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer from 1955 to 1961 and then as the Shadow Foreign Secretary from 1961 to 1963, when he was elected leader of the Labour Party after the sudden death of Hugh Gaitskell. Wilson narrowly won the 1964 election, going on to win a much increased majority in a snap 1966 election. Wilson's first period as Prime Minister coincided with a period of low unemployment and relative economic prosperity, though also of significant problems with Britain's external balance of payments. In 1969, Wilson sent British troops to Northern Ireland, after losing the 1970 general election to Edward Heath. He spent 4 years as leader of the opposition before the February 1974 general election resulted in a hung parliament. After Heath's talks with the Liberals broke down, Wilson returned to power as leader of a minority government until there was a second general election in the autumn, which resulted in a narrow Labour victory. A period of economic crisis was now beginning to hit most Western countries, and in 1976 Wilson suddenly announced his resignation as Prime Minister. Wilson's own approach to socialism was moderate, with emphasis on increasing opportunity within society, for example through change and expansion within the education system, allied to the technocratic aim of taking better advantage of rapid scientific progress, rather than on the more controversial socialist goal of promoting wider public ownership of industry. He took little action to pursue the Labour Party constitution's stated dedication to such nationalisation, though he did not formally disown it. Himself a member of the Labour Party's soft left, Wilson joked about leading a cabinet that was made up mostly of Social Democrats, comparing himself to a Bolshevik revolutionary presiding over a czarist cabinet. But there was arguably little to divide him ideologically from the cabinet majority. Labour Party historians see his years in office as lost opportunities for major reforms. However, in keeping with the mood of the 1960s, his government sponsored liberal changes in a number of social areas. They were generally not his initiatives. These included the liberalization of laws on censorship, divorce, homosexuality, immigration, and abortion, as well as the abolition of capital punishment, which was due in part to the initiatives of backbench MPs who had the support of Roy Jenkins during his time as Home Secretary. Overall, Wilson is seen to have managed a number of difficult political issues with considerable tactical skill, including such potentially divisive issues for his party as the role of public ownership, British membership of the European Community, and the Vietnam War, while continuing to maintain a costly military presence east of Suez. His stated ambition of substantially improving Britain's long-term economic performance remained largely unfulfilled. He lost his energy and drive in his second government, 1974 to 76, and accomplished little as the leadership split over Europe and trade union issues began tearing Labour apart. Early life. Wilson was born at 4 Warnford Road, Huddersfield, in the West Riding of Yorkshire, England, on the 11th of March 1916. He came from a political family. His father, James Herbert Wilson, was a works chemist who had been active in the Liberal Party and then joined the Labour Party. His mother, Ethel, was a schoolteacher before her marriage, and her brother, Sir Harold Seddon, was a Member of Parliament in Western Australia. When Wilson was 8, he visited London, and a later-to-be-famous photograph was taken of him standing on the doorstep of 10 Downing Street. He was a supporter of his hometown football club, Huddersfield Town. Education: Wilson won a scholarship to attend Royds Hall Grammar School, his local grammar school in Huddersfield in Yorkshire. In December 1930, his father, working as an industrial chemist, was made redundant, and it took him nearly 2 years to find work. He moved to Spittal on the Wirral, Cheshire, in order to do so. Wilson was educated in the 6th form at the Wirral Grammar School for Boys, where he became head boy. Wilson did well at school, and although he missed getting a scholarship, he obtained an exhibition, which, when topped up by a county grant, enabled him to study modern history at Jesus College, Oxford, from 1934. At Oxford, Wilson was moderately active in politics as a member of the Liberal Party, but was strongly influenced by G.D.H. Cole. He graduated in PPE with an outstanding first-class Bachelor of Arts degree, with alphas on every paper in the final examinations, and a series of major academic awards. Biographer Roy Jenkins says, academically his results put him among prime ministers in the category of Peel, Gladstone, Asquith, and no one else, but he lacked originality. What he was superb at was the quick assimilation of knowledge, combined with an ability to keep it ordered in his mind and to present it lucidly in a form welcome to his examiners. He continued in academia, becoming one of the youngest Oxford dons of the century at the age of 21. He was a lecturer in economic history at New College from 1937, and a research fellow at University College. Marriage on New Year's Day 1940, in the chapel of Mansfield College, Oxford. He married Mary Baldwin, who remained his wife until his death. Mary Wilson became a published poet. They had 2 sons, Robin and Giles. Robin became a professor of mathematics, and Giles became a teacher. In the 20s, his sons were under a kidnap threat from the IRA because of the father's prominence. Statistician for the war. On the outbreak of the Second World War, Wilson volunteered for service but was classed as a specialist and moved into the civil service instead. For much of this time, he was a research assistant to William Beveridge, the master of the college, working on the issues of unemployment and the trade cycle. He later became a statistician and economist for the coal industry. He was Director of Economics and Statistics at the Ministry of Fuel and Power 1943–44 and received an OBE for his services. He was to remain passionately interested in statistics. As President of the Board of Trade, he was the driving force behind the Statistics of Trade Act 1947, which is still the authority governing most economic statistics in Great Britain. He was instrumental as Prime Minister in appointing Klaus Moser as head of the Central Statistical Office, and was President of the Royal Statistical Society in 1972–73. Member of Parliament. As the war drew to an end, he searched for a seat to fight at the impending general election. He was selected for the constituency of Ormskirk, then held by Stephen King Hall. Wilson agreed to be adopted as the candidate immediately rather than delay until the election was called, and was therefore compelled to resign from his position in the civil service. He served as pre-elector in economics at University College between his resignation and his election to the House of Commons. He also used this time to write a New Deal for coal. which used his wartime experience to argue for nationalization of the coal mines on the grounds of the improved efficiency he predicted would ensue. In the 1945 general election, Wilson won his seat in the Labour landslide. To his surprise, he was immediately appointed to the government by Prime Minister Clement Attlee as Parliamentary Secretary to the Ministry of Works. 2 years later, he became Secretary for Overseas Trade, in which capacity he made several official trips to the Soviet Union to negotiate supply contracts. In the general election of 1950, his Ormskirk constituency was significantly altered and he was narrowly elected for the new seat of Huyton near Liverpool, where he served for 33 years until 1983. On the 29th of September 1947, Wilson was appointed President of the Board of Trade, at 31 becoming the youngest member of a British cabinet in the 20th century. He took a lead in abolishing some wartime rationing, which he referred to as a bonfire of controls. His role in internal debates during the summer of 1949 over whether or not to devalue sterling, in which he was perceived to have played both sides of the issue, tarnished his reputation in both political and official circles. Wilson was becoming known in the Labour Party as a left-winger and joined Aneurin Bevan and John Freeman in resigning from the government in April 1951 in protest at the introduction of National Health Service medical charges to meet the financial demands imposed by the Korean War. After the Labour Party lost the 1951 election, he became the chairman of Keep Left, Bevan's political group, but soon after he began to distance himself from Bevan. Wilson was appointed to the Shadow Cabinet by Labour Party leader Hugh Gaitskell in 1955 as Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, and he proved to be very effective. One of his procedural moves caused a substantial delay to the progress of the government's finance bill in 1955, and his speeches as Shadow Chancellor from 1956 were widely praised for the clarity and wit. He coined the term «gnomes of Zurich» to ridicule Swiss bankers for selling Britain short and pushing the pound down by speculation. He conducted an inquiry into the Labour Party's organisation following its defeat in the 1955 general election, which compared Labour's organisation to an antiquated penny-farthing bicycle, and made various recommendations for improvements. Unusually, Wilson combined the job of chairman of the House of Commons Public Accounts Committee with that of Shadow Chancellor from 1959, holding that position until 1963. Wilson steered a course in intra-party matters in the 1950s and early 1960s that left him neither fully accepted nor trusted by the left and the right in the Labour Party. Despite his earlier association with the left-wing Aneurin Bevan, in 1955 he backed Gaitskell, considered the right-of-centre candidate in internal Labour Party terms, against Bevan for the party leadership. He then launched an opportunistic but unsuccessful challenge to Gaitskell's leadership in November 1960 in the wake of the Labour Party's 1959 defeat. Gaitskell's controversial attempt to ditch Labour's commitment to nationalisation by scrapping Clause 4, and Gaitskell's defeat at the 1960 party conference over a motion supporting unilateral nuclear disarmament. Wilson would later be moved to the position of Shadow Foreign Secretary in 1961, before he challenged for the deputy leadership in 1962 but was defeated by George Brown. Gaitskell died in January 1963, just as the Labour Party had begun to unite and appeared to have a very good chance of winning the next election. With the Macmillan government running into trouble, Wilson was adopted as the left-wing candidate for the leadership. defeating Brown and James Callaghan to become the leader of the Labour Party and the leader of the opposition. At the Labour Party's 1963 annual conference, Wilson made both his best-remembered speech on the implications of scientific and technological change. He argued that the Britain that is going to be forged in the white heat of this revolution will be no place for restrictive practices or outdated measures on either side of industry. This speech did much to set Wilson's reputation as a technocrat not tied to the prevailing class system. Labour's 1964 election campaign was aided by the Profumo affair, a ministerial sex scandal that had mortally wounded Harold Macmillan and hurt the Conservatives. Wilson made capital without getting involved in the less salubrious aspects. Sir Alec Douglas Home was an aristocrat who had given up his peerage to sit in the House of Commons and become Prime Minister upon Macmillan's resignation. To Wilson's comment that he was out of touch with ordinary people since he was the 14th Earl of Home, Home retorted, "I suppose Mr. Wilson is the 14th Mr. Wilson."